our faithfulness. What a joy it is to be serving here in Orange County together. Well, let's go. New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve, I was sitting with the family. We always do this. We sit around the table and we go over our goals, and we have different categories. And I stood up around 9 p.m. and I thought, kind of like the old days, well, hey, let's watch the ball drop. I want to watch the ball drop, because 9 p.m. our time is 12 or whatever, how that works. So I stood up, grabbed the remote, and I walked over to the TV and I turned it on. And I wouldn't recommend it. That whole ball drop thing, it's nothing redemptive, scantily clad pop stars and whatever else. And so I'm about to turn it off when all of a sudden Ryan Seacrest and his gorgeous smile said, "It's time to sing our anthem." And I thought, well, anthem? Maybe the national anthem? I didn't know. So I kept watching. And then he invited out a guy I'd never heard of, an old crooner named Paul Anka. And so here you have in New York 1 million people packing the streets. Maybe some of you saw it. And they all grab each other and they start swaying to the music. And they were all singing a song that was originally written by John Lennon that's called Imagine. Imagine all the people. Imagine there's no heaven. Imagine just the sky above, no hell below. Imagine all the people living for today. Oh. And I'm listening to that, and I got to be honest, I got all preacher with my family. I turned it off. I said, "See, this is the kind of nation you kids are growing up in." And my kids look over. I said, "That's like a humanist anthem. That's an atheist anthem. Go ahead and just think about there being no heaven and there being no hell, and it's all about the people living for today." And I'm doing what preachers do on New Year's Eve. My wife says, "Yeah, it's just sad." And one of my kids says, "Yeah, that's dumb," and so they're joining my raucous. But I thought it was interesting, and I want you to really think about this, that a song that brings the nation together on New Year's Eve is a song about how powerful we are and how absent God is. Because what we're about to see here this morning is really, that's John's template for where he goes next. And you remember last week, right? He starts with the eternality of Jesus. Jesus has always existed. He was with God, and he is God. And then, really quickly, in the prologue, he immediately turns to the problem of mankind. And he says mankind exists in this utter darkness, in this spiritual deadness, in this realm that is controlled by Satan. And here's the problem: even if they wanted to see, they can't. They're like kids in a 100-year-old house groping around in the dark, and there's sharp things that can hit them. There's floors that they can fall through, and even if they wanted to see, they wouldn't be able to see just how black and dark and dismal things are. That's why gender confusion and gender blending. That's why LGBTQIA. That's why pornography and addictions, even though we know it destroys marriages. That's why genocide and world wars. That's why, because humanity exists in this utter darkness. They're blind. But John's about to tell us that's why Jesus came. He came to be the light, to shine a light, to expose the darkness, to bring solution to the darkness, to contrast the dark, so that there would be a group of people who, if they were in New York on New Year's Eve 2024, would not start singing with everybody else a humanist anthem. In fact, what they would want to do is they would want to walk up on stage, if security did not take them out, grab the microphone from the grinning Ryan Seacrest and shout to the audience, "It is not about the people. There is a heaven, and it is not about living for today, because there is in fact someone who is greater." That's where he goes. So if you have your Bible, open it with me again. Let's do this, to John's Gospel. And I want you just to ask yourself as we work through this morning, and this is very personal. This is not, has America seen the light? This is not, has Ryan Seacrest seen? This is not even as a church have we seen the light. I want you to be thinking, have you in fact seen the light? Are you sure? Or are you possibly still in darkness? And we're going to see John work through the light, and then his witness, his word, and his work. But I want you thinking about that one question. Have you seen the light, and are you holding on to the light? For all your hope and future. So let's begin. Let's look, number one, at the light and his witness, and you'll see it. We're going to fly over this one. In John chapter 1, verse 1, the light and his witness, he's going to be talking to us a little bit about John the Baptist. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Read with me in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word. All right, friends, go ahead and let me have it here. Who's the Word? The Logos. Jesus, very good. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Remember, those are all imperfects. This is an ongoing, eternal event. He was in the beginning with God. And then verse 3, all things aorist, boom, came into being by him. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. He made the stars. He made the sun. He made the earth. He made it all. In verse 4, and in him was life, and the life was here we go into our theme this morning, the light of men, the awakening of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. So hopefully you can start to feel the plot line thicken there. The eternal Son of God is the light. 18 times in this letter, we'll get to it. He arrives on earth. He's shining into Satan's dark realm, and then the realm can't smother it no matter how hard it's going to try. And then in verse 6, we get to this witness. You all know who he is. There came a man sent from God whose name was John. Not John the Apostle, now John the Baptist or John the Baptizer. We'll call him JB. He came for a witness, that he might bear witness. And in fact, if you have a pen, just underline witness. He uses it 3 times. He came as a witness, that he might bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. There it is, kind of witness again. Verse 8, he was not the light, but he came that he might bear witness of the light. Now, show of hands, who knows who John the Baptizer is? Has studied him before. Oh, okay, not everybody. I think you're not engaged, is what I think. I think you decided to keep your hands down because I think you know who he is. Now, we're going to get to him in a couple of weeks, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time on JB now. But it is important for you to have kind of a template in your mind and a summary in your mind. This guy, I'm going to use young people terminology. This guy, as the youngsters say, had a lot of riz. Now, anyone over 30, that's like what we used to call charisma. They call it riz, and now they can no longer use it ever again because the old guy used it, right? But a lot of times we think of John the Baptist kind of like the dude in the shows, right? He's kind of weird, long hair, straggly, has like 14 people that listen to him, and he's dunking them. But if you go back and you study, scholars kind of examine what happened around Aenon near Salim, and if archaeologically we'll go visit this place, hopefully we're in Israel. But it's interesting. Some of the scholars say his crowds might have been upwards, ready, of 20 or 25, maybe 30,000 people. So it's like the ancient equivalent of Billy Graham. This was a guy who crowds are flocking into the countrysides to listen to. He was very, very well known. Now, it's important theologically to put a couple things together about John the Baptist, and again, we'll get to this soon, okay? Number one is that John the Baptist is really kind of the pivot point in biblical history. Because before John the Baptist, you've got law and prophets, the Old Covenant. You get to John the Baptist, and now he's talking about another named Jesus who would come, preach the kingdom of God, and then talk about faith in his person. And so really you have the pivot point in history here at John the Baptist. And then also, this is important, Jesus says that John the Baptist was, you ready, the greatest man to ever live. And Matthew's statement, commentary, seems to suggest that's because John the Baptist was so humble that Jesus said, yeah, because John the Baptist came and he said, it's not about me. I'm a voice crying out in the wilderness, meaning it's not even about my body. I don't want you to see me. I just want you to hear the voice as I point toward Jesus. He spends his whole life pointing towards Jesus. He eventually ends up in prison because of Jesus, basically. He ends up dying. His head taken by a teenage pole dancer, this young prostitute-type girl, because of Jesus. All of his followers he sends to follow Jesus, right? Everything in his life was John the Baptist must decrease so that Jesus must increase. That was everything about his life. And then right away here at the beginning, we begin to ask a question, and this is good inductive Bible study, right? Why does John the Apostle, and I want you to really ask this of yourself and see if you can answer, why does John the Apostle start with 2 verses on John the Baptizer? He's going to come back and talk about him later. Why would he start when he's talking about the eternal Son of God with 2 little verses on John the Baptist? And obviously the best answer would be because of the time of John's writing, which is later in the 1st century after all the synoptics have been written. Remember, John is not writing a chronology, John is writing a theology. John is writing to correct variant issues and problems with belief in the person of Jesus, the work of Jesus, and let's all just answer this together. What was one of the big problems early on in the 1st century when it came theologically to the person of Jesus versus the person of John the Baptist? There were still a lot of people who were following JB. You go, well, how do we know that? Because Paul actually encounters some of them. You can read it in the book of Acts, where Paul runs into a group of guys in Ephesus, and he's trying to tell them about Jesus, and they're going, no, we're good. Paul says, why are you good? He says, they say, because we follow John the Baptizer. Now, by this point, John the Baptist has been dead 25 years. So Paul has the privilege of telling them a very important truth. John the Baptist did not serve and minister for John the Baptist. Finish it with me. John the Baptist came and served and ministered for who? Jesus. And so he has the chance to share the gospel, and there's a beautiful moment where these men are saved and filled with the Holy Spirit. It's a beautiful scene on the rivers of Ephesus. Now, very important to understand, that's what we're seeing here. John wants everyone to understand that John the Baptist, when they read his letter, was simply pointing to the true light. Now, verse 9, we get into the meat of the matter, and hopefully you'll sense the problem right away. We move from the light and his witness to the light and his, ready? His world. His world. John says in verse 9, there was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. And we don't got to spend too much time here because I know our church, everyone gets it. You were here last week. But let's just pause for a second and ask a really important question. What was the greatest moment in all of history? Come on. What was it? Some of you are like, it was when fire got created. When they made the wheel, right? How about the invention of the printing press? How about the Renaissance? The splitting of the atom, right? Come on. Greatest moment in all of history. Now, any Christian, the moment we're saved or the moment we begin studying God's Word is always going to agree that the greatest moment in human history was when God came and he stepped on to planet Earth. The incarnation, Latin incarnatus. In the flesh. He took flesh. And catch how he describes that there. There was the true light. He describes the entrance, and he calls him the true light. Now, there's a couple ways that John delineates between true and false. And John's a very black and white guy, and so a lot of times it's like just totally true and totally false. But here he softens the blow. It's interesting. He says there was the true light, which seems to indicate he's different from all the, end quote, partial lights, right? Because there's a lot of partial knowledge in the world, and we don't go, well, that's not true, propositionally, right? You can get a lot of degrees. You can go and study history, you can study atomic energy, you can study the sciences, and a lot of those are partial lights, but what the point he's making here is they're not the ultimate light. They can help you understand certain things, but not the everything. They can help you understand the natural, but not the supernatural. So they can take you a distance, but they can never take you all the way to fullness. And so he says, not only does the true light come, the complete light, the everything light, he comes into the world, then he says he enlightens every man. And again, John's writing in the 1st century, and so he's talking about types of men. This is not a Jewish thing. This is now something that's an everybody thing. The Jews have squandered this thing, and it's going to go out to everybody. In fact, by the time John's writing, this thing has spread across the Roman Empire. And so real important right there to just kind of put a little reminder in front of you, just in your own mind, to never mistake partial lights for ultimate lights. I mean, some of you are like, you love science. Some of you love politics. Some of you love diplomas and education. Some of you are really good at business, and you're experiencing material prosperity, right? You want to make sure that not to get caught up in all the partial lights to where you miss what John's going to call the ultimate light. And then in verse 10, you see the problem. You'll get it right away. He, meaning the true light, was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world, read it with me, did not what? There's the heartbreaking reality. There's the dark backdrop. The maker of the stars and the designer of the oceans and the creator of the first man steps into the world and nobody got it. And I know because we just celebrated Christmas that everyone in the room knows this story, but I want to make sure you remember it, right? This is the Christmas story. The angels unfurl the heavens. Go ahead and picture it. The veil between heaven and earth is somehow split, and you've got angels up there, and they're singing. Gloria in excelsis Deo, there's been born unto you a Savior who is Christ the Lord. Go to the city of David. Literally, the heavens split open, and they're letting the world know that it has happened. It has happened. The moment in time has come. We're in awe. We're astounded. And then what's happening down here on the ball of dirt? Come on. You remember? What's the innkeeper do? He yawns and says there's no room in the inn. Sorry, guys. Herod tries to kill the babies. Even Zacharias, who's a priest, is kind of doubtful about this whole deal. Joseph says, I'll just divorce the girl. And you're down to Elisheba, Mary, Simeon, and then a temple shut-in named Anna. Which is why John is about to spend 21 chapters saying, you need to understand the Creator came in to his creation. You need to wake up. He whispers and the wind stops. He looks at water and it turns into manufactured wine molecules. He looks at leprosy and immediately it disappears. There's a guy named Lazarus who's been dead 4 days and smells like putrefying pus, and he comes walking out of a cave and he unwraps his mummy bandages because this man said, come forth. You need to understand, O world, you need to wake up, O world, that the light has come. This, friends, is a stark reminder, you ready, of how blind we are. You go, well, no, that was them. They were blind. No, it's us. Because we live in the 21st century. Where we literally, us, our generation, send crafts into interstellar heights. Our generation studies in a microscope the genome of the human body and DNA. And yet we're the ones, think about this, who stand in New York, put our arms around each other, and sway, singing a humanist anthem about the fact, imagine there's no heaven. I want you to imagine that. And I want you to imagine it's about all the people living for today. Whoa! How absolutely blind is humanity. Jesus in John 3:19 gives the verdict, and we'll get there in a couple weeks. He says, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men loved the darkness instead of the light, for their deeds were evil. Men do not want there to be a God, because if there's a God, they'll be held to account by him. They would rather ignore him so they can go about their evil lust. We're blind. And you'll never understand John's gospel unless you understand this is the backdrop. And right there we go, well, could it get any worse than that? Here is the creator of the universe who steps into it, and then the world, generally speaking, says, nah, we don't like you. We don't believe in you. We want to ignore you. And then you go, well, could it get any worse? And look at verse 11. It does. John says, and he's actually bringing spiritual blindness into even sharper focus, he came to his own. And if you have a pen there, just go ahead in the margin if you want and write neuter. It's kind of I know it sounds silly. It's a Greek phrase, though. What he's talking about here is his own, the place. He came into his nation, the nation where all the promises had been pointing to him, and those who were his own. Now that own, you could write in the margin there, is masculine, so he's talking about the people, meaning the family. And so literally, he comes to his place, he comes to his people, and they did not receive him. So not only did the world reject him, he came literally to the promised place and people, and they also rejected him as well. There are in studies of literature some very famous pieces in the Western world that I think most of you, if you've read them, would agree, kind of are the symbol of what we call perfidy or backstabbing. And typically those are Greek tragedies. Has anybody here ever read like Homer, Odyssey? Quite a few of you. Now, do you remember in Greek tragedy, King Agamemnon? You remember him? So he's the guy, he goes off and he conquers Troy and he comes back in triumph and glory. But then what happens to him? Do you remember? When he gets home, his unfaithful wife actually kills him. And so when we read stories like that, we go, oh, it's such a surprise, It's like the perfect story, and he comes home on a high, and then boom, he gets his legs taken out. And we tend to look at stuff like that and go, that's the ultimate story or example of tragedy. But actually, the life of Jesus, humanly speaking, is the real story of perfidy, of backstabbing, and of tragedy. And that's the point that John is making. In fact, if you want, look real quick with me, go back a few books, go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, go back three Gospels, and look at Matthew. And you can see there's a story in there in Matthew 21 where Jesus is literally, last week of his life, he's going toe-to-toe with the scribes and Pharisees. And they're looking for a reason to off him. They're looking for a reason to kill him. And so he's just confronting them. It's almost like the last week of his life, he was saying, here we go, guys. Come on, bring it, right? I know where this ends, and I know where you want this to end, and so we're going to talk. And look at Matthew 21, verse 33. He puts a parable in front of them, and he just clarifies what's actually going on. And you've probably heard this before, but I want you to be the one to help me commentate on it, okay? So you're going to preach back to me here in a second, okay? Matthew 21, verse 33. Jesus says, hey guys, there was a landowner who planted a vineyard, and he put a wall around it, and then he dug a wine press in it, and he built a tower. And he rented it to the vine growers, and he went on a long journey. And then when the harvest approached, he sent his slaves to the vine growers to receive his produce. And the vine growers took his slaves and they beat one. And then they killed another. And then they stoned a third. Jump down to verse 37. But afterwards, he sent his son to them, saying, surely they will respect my boy. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. Now, who knows the parable? You ready? Here we go. Preach to me. All right? Preach to me, okay? Who is the owner of the vineyard? That he represents God. Very good, okay? Now, who is the generally speaking, the tenants or the lessees of the vineyard? That represents the nation of Israel, right? Now, who is we'll call them the messengers who come and they request all the payback for the land that have been given out to the tenant farmers? That represents, generally speaking, the prophets. And then you guys will surely get this one, right? Theologically astute crowd. Who represents the son, the heir, at the very end of the story? Obviously, that is. And what is he saying? He's saying God gave you this nation. And then he sends his prophets to say, I want you to respond to me, and you killed the first one. I want you to turn to me, the God of loving kindness, and has said, and you killed the second ones. And then I sent another one to you, begging and pleading that you would come and love me for giving you all of this, and you killed the third one. Oh, but the father finally said, surely, if I send my boy, they'll respond. But did they? No. They took the son and they strung him up on a piece of raw timber. And they nailed him there, saying, we will take everything for ourselves. See, when we study back into the first century, there should be a part of us, friends, that are going, what is wrong with you people? And if you go, well, maybe they just didn't know. They knew. When Herod hears about the birth of this little boy, what does he do? He gets the scribes and he says, where is he to be born? And what did they say? We know he's going to be born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem. The angels are shouting. The stars are pointing. A little guy is growing up perfect. Can you imagine? Who has a brother and sister, by the way? You ever read about Jesus' brothers, human brothers, his half-brothers, and you think, dude, I don't know how many spankings you all got. My bottom. And you have one brother who's perfect. There's an evangelist in the desert with 30,000 followers who is telling everyone that he is the Son of God, the Lamb that takes away the sins of the world. And oh, by the way, even the Roman prefect says, I want to wash my hands of this because this guy is different. And we look at these people and we go, what is wrong with you? And what John's doing here, friends, and he's going to do it for 21 chapters, is making sure that we understand. And if you don't get this, you're not going to get John's gospel. You ready? The absolute darkness and death of the human condition. The total depravity of the human heart. There is nothing inside of you that can ever get to God. As in Adam, one man, as in Adam, all die. As Adam died, all died. As in one trespass, all have committed a trespass. We all, from the time we are born totally anti-God. Now, there's always someone who goes, well, no, that's not true because, like, there's good people out there. My buddy Joe at work, he's pretty good. He's not a Hitler, you know. He's a pretty good guy, and he's not a Christian, right? So I don't think he was born bad. Okay, let's have a cleaning contest. You ready? We'll do this. First service said they were down for a cleaning contest, so maybe you guys are as well. We're going to go home and everyone get their sheets. I don't know what else you have in your house that's white, so take your sheets. We're going to have a cleaning contest next Sunday. We're going to put them all out there in the parking lot. We're going to hang them all up on clotheslines, and we're going to see who has the cleanest, whitest sheets. So you Clorox bleach them. Some of you do the organic stuff, and so you can do that. That's fine. I don't want you to bring the whitest sheets that you possibly can clean, and we're going to hang them up out there, and then we're going to have judges go around, and we're going to see who has the absolute cleanest home in all of Orange County. Sound good? That sounds exciting, right? I know it's a dumb illustration, but it comes around, okay? But what I didn't want to tell you is that because of the storm, we're going to have a big snow. I know it's California, it's a stretch, it's an illustration, go with me. And then the snow happens and it blankets the trees and it blankets the parking lot. So we're going to go and stand out there and hang up all of our perfectly white sheets, but then it snows. And what happens when you take your sheets and you put them up against real white? You're going to see around this room that everyone has spots and stains and brown and gray somewhere on their sheets. What John is saying is that when the light of the world came, he was so bright that he exposed the fact that every single person ever born is stained. And he is forcing us, you ready, theologically, to deal with something that was stated way back in the beginning in the book of Genesis called the fall of mankind, answering this question: what happened at the fall? How bad was it at the fall? How far did man fall? And there's only three answers to that, you know? There's only three. How far did mankind fall? Number one, right, this is one answer, he fell upward. You believe that one? But all the secularists do, right? There's no fall. Man's getting better and better. We're all evolving, baby. All right? Anybody who has just a lick of common sense looks around the world and go, that ain't true. So let's just take that one and throw it out. Leaves you two options. One, when man fell, he fell partway. That means he fell, but he still had enough inside of him to work with God and get his way to heaven. You know, he was in the coffin, but one arm was hanging out. And that can swing you, that partway view, all the way over into some form of Catholicism with venial sin, or all the way over into some form of Pelagian view, where you and God can work it out together. So there's the upward view, there's the partway view, and then, ready? There's the biblical view, which is man did not fall partway. He fell what? All the way. Mankind is dead. He is a corpse. He is lifeless. Ephesians 2:1. For you were dead in your trespass and sin. 1 Corinthians 2:14. The natural man cannot accept the things of God. He's dead. If you do not understand that, you will not understand John's gospel. Which brings about the obvious question, what are we going to do? If the light came into the world and proved the fact that everyone was dead, completely blind, lost in dark, what are we going to do? And that's why you have the answer there in verse 12. From the light in his world to the light in his work, verse 12. Here's why he came. But your entire destiny hangs on that but. You circle that but in your Bible in verse 12. Because everything that comes before it is condemnation and death. And now he brings the solution. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name. He says, in the middle of all that darkness, God provided an avenue whereby there would be a group pulled out unto himself who would have hope and be a part of his family. In fact, if you have a pen, just look at each clause there, because what he's doing is he's explaining how this works on the human side. Look at each clause. Receive, as many as received him. Receive explains the width or the breadth of the offer. This is what we call the gospel call. It's open to everyone. It's no longer a Jewish thing. You know, the Jewish squandered this. They killed the Messiah, and now it's available to everyone. So receive simply means recognize this opportunity. And then jump down to the end of verse 12. He says, believe. Whereas receive explains the width of the offer, believe explains the condition of the offer. And this is a word you're going to see all throughout John's gospel, pistuo. It's not a mental assent. It's not like you go, oh yeah, intellectually and historically, Jesus was real. It literally means I depend upon, I confide in, I throw my weight upon. It's a term of movement. I am taking my life and I am putting it all in, dependent upon this one that I'm reading about, the Logos, the light, the Son of the living God, who was and is to come. I'm putting my life upon him. So receive explains the width of the offer. Believe explains the condition of the offer. Look at that other line there. That he gave the right. The right explains the power of the offer. Who is the one who has the authority to make this possible? And it obviously is the Logos, the light. It is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who says, I can unlock the darkness inside of a soul. I can regenerate a man. I can give him a new heart. I can make him new. Now, this is reminding me right here, the old story of Napoleon. Maybe you remember this story. Napoleon is riding his horse, and suddenly it begins to buck, and one of his squires reaches over and grabs the reins, and he pulls it down to protect the emperor. And Napoleon looks at him. I love this. He says, thank you, Captain. The little squire, the private, immediately looks up at him, shocked. And then he begins to rip off his little uniform, and he runs up to the officer's quarters, and he bursts in and says, give me my new stripes, guys, I'm one of you. All the officers look at him, and they say, based on whose authority? And he says, the emperor's. He did not hesitate. He did not wait. The moment it was said, he knew it was done. And that's what happens in the life of someone who is submitted to Jesus Christ. They can know that the authority of the heavens is working on their behalf, leading to the outcome. Look at the next line. Children. As many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. Children explains the outcome of the offer, full adoption, and I want to pause there just for a second because this is one of those things that I think we often skip over too much in the Reformed-ish world, in evangelical conservatism. We, because of the Reformation, and rightfully so, we are Protestant. We are Protestant against the Catholic Church. Yes, I get that. And because of that, in our moorings in Martin Luther, listen closely, we love, and we always should, justification by faith alone. We teach that everywhere, all the time. And that's a good thing. There is nothing so special, right? It's so beautiful to think about the idea of God looking at us because of Christ and saying, not guilty. You're justified. But sometimes we forget that justification is but one step in the conversion process towards the ultimate and beautiful summation and conclusion of adoption. And being a true son or daughter of the living God. It's one thing for a judge to look at you and say, not guilty. It's a whole nother thing for that judge to then stand up from behind the desk, walk over, put his arm around you and say, from this point forward, you're my boy and everything that I have is yours. That's adoption. And then he finishes in verse 13 from the heavenly side. He says, on the earthly side, what you're experiencing is just a recognition that Christ is who he says he is. And then because of his authority, that you've become a child of God. And look at verse 13. He's just reminding us, as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of who? Who did it? God. And he couldn't be more clear here, friends. If you got a pen, you can just underline each clause. Not born of blood, that's your descent. That's where you're from, your family line. That's your ancestry, right? You don't get saved because you went to Awana. Some of you are like, I went to Awana. I went to Christian school. I wore my uniform. Doesn't matter. Your family, your ancestry, your bloodline. Some of you go, I'm Charles Spurgeon's great-great-great-granddad. Doesn't matter. It's not your descent. Then he goes on there, look at the next clause, the will of the flesh, that's your desire. That's your desire, your grit, your effort, joining the church and giving money and studying hard and walking around. That's not going to do it. You can't will your way into the good graces of God in heaven. And then he finishes there with the design. See, the will of the flesh nor the design of man. He's talking about religious systems, like the Pope or the priest, a creed, baby baptism. Some of you in here might go, well, I was baptized as a baby, so I'm in. No. It's not the way it works. But I vote conservative. Not the way it works. You imagine how foolish it would be for any one of us in the room to ever think that we physically birthed ourselves. Can you imagine? Let's go a step further. How about physically conceived ourselves? Here we go. Boom. Okay. Oh, genetics. Want to look taller when I arrive. Grow those feet. Like to have a little bit of streaking, blonde highlights in my hair. Okay. What color eyes do you want? I don't know. Brown, blue, okay. Here I am. I want to come out in December, so let's get ready. Here I go. Mama, get ready. I'll tell you when to push. Oh, ta-da! World, I've arrived. Some of you are thinking, who invited me to this church? What? This crazy guy up here, you know? Everyone in the room, the moment I said it, you immediately got the fact that is about the most ignorant thing that any human could ever say. When we're talking about the miracle of a dead, wicked heart having life breathed in, made new, sitting up, turning from self, clinging to God, why would we ever then say it was something that I did? Do you remember the question I asked you at the beginning? Have you seen the light? Yes or no? Have you received? Have you believed that it is not you, it is not your family, it is not your bloodline, it is not your will or your effort, it is not a religious system, walking an aisle, praying a prayer. Have you come to the place where you have fallen to your face and simply recognized and thrown your complete dependence on the fact it is somebody else? To the point that if you were in New York City and you saw a group of people ready to sing, "There's no heaven, it's all about the people living for today," you would want to walk up on that stage and grab that microphone, look at the crowd, and say, "How dare you?" I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by